One of my colleagues at the Campaign for America's Future on a conference call yesterday said, well, I heard something about chickens, this quote-unquote pet food scandal has spread to chickens, and how can I know what kind of chickens I can buy? And I said, well, that's simple. For the time being, you cannot eat chicken. You cannot buy chicken. Yesterday there was a conference call with the FDA's new food safety czar, bit of damage control, and he revealed that 3 million, but it's only 3 million, it's only like 2 or 3%, he said, of the chickens in America have actually been contaminated with melamine, which is the poison that Chinese companies have been using to spike the protein content to get a higher price on the market. But we know better as a constituent in plastic dinnerware. Because of conservative food safety policy, corporations are allowed to sell their substandard pet food to agricultural processors for animal feed. So as I'm thinking about it now, it's a good thing she heard it from me, because she sure as hell isn't going to hear it from the government. The FDA's active policy is only to act after an illness or death is reported. And even then, as many of you know, as every American should know, the government can only recommend a recall. There's some complicated history behind that. Basically, it was supposed to be the USDA that ordered the recalls, but the USDA was very early on captured by the farm lobby. As I've been asking people on my blog, The Big Con, which you can get at ourfuture.com/thebigcon, have you ever seen a highway patrolman pull himself over and give himself a ticket? Doesn't happen. This is one of the ways the conservative ideology is incinerating a pillar of our civilization, really of any civilization, that a great nation works to protect its citizens from avoidable sickness and death. The FDA budget is flatlined, inspections have gone down 75%, personnel has declined, the incidence of two very common foodborne pathogens, E. coli and Salmonella, went way down during the Clinton administration, but now we're back to that early 1990s baseline as we face this era of globalization and more imported food, much of it from China, where, as we recently learned from the New York Times, the editor of the newspaper in the company, in the city where the company actually introduced the melamine into the pet food, didn't know that there had been a pet food scandal, and told the Times that he wouldn't be able to report it even if he had known. It's what I call E. coli conservatism. So what does the FDA do in this era of E. coli conservatism? They basically become a public relations agency for industry. My favorite example came after a 2002 outbreak of food poisoning in schools, school lunches. The acting FDA chair, and I'm paraphrasing him in the words of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the best paper for this kind of stuff, quote, said, "Food preparers must be taught that foods that could once be eaten raw, such as hamburger, eggs, or oysters, now have to be cooked thoroughly, because ever-evolving organisms can find a new niche in such foods," which I'm sure was a colossal disappointment to the school kids who are frequenting their middle school's raw bars and ordering off the menu for steak tartare. But that's basically, they have a palette of public relations responses, and one of them is, well, Grandma used to know how to take care of food, and she knew to cook our food thoroughly, but we've become less traditional society, and we're not able to know how to take care of food, and basically it's one of these, you're all on your own. Now the guy who said that is Lester Crawford, who is a name that was in the news last year. He was the acting FDA chair for several years, and in a phrase that my Campaign for America's Future colleague Bill Scher calls recess pool, he's one of the many Bush officials that they didn't dare put before a Senate confirmation process until they safely were in control of the Senate, at which point he became the actual FDA chair and lasted 2 months after it was discovered that he had lied about what stocks he was trading in, including drug company stocks. Now, this guy, Crawford, is really, really fascinating. I want to briefly run through his story, and just give me, timekeeper, just give me 4 or 5 minutes, and then shoot me in the face, because really, I could go on. He's a fascinating guy. In the 60s, he was working at a company called American Cyanamid, which was the country's biggest producer of antibiotics. And downstream from American Cyanamid, they were realizing that the fish were getting bigger and healthier and stronger. And some bright guy at American Cyanamid said, wow, I bet it's our antibiotics. Came up with the idea of putting antibiotics in cattle feed. And lo and behold, before long, cattle was growing 10% bigger with 10% less feed. Now, Lester Crawford was the whistleblower. He said this is going to be dangerous. People are going to develop resistance. And he became a very public-spirited guy, taking on his own company. He went to work for the FDA in the 70s and became the guy who was the point man to fight against this. Went through kind of a fascinating career trajectory in which he stayed in government during Reagan and really did remain a pretty strong advocate for public health issues. He was not a Reagan apparatchik. And let's see, I'm just gonna, so there was kind of a watershed movement that kind of came about in around about 1986, and he began to sort of start speaking in this kind of public relations code and becoming sort of less and less an advocate for the kind of really the values that he had advocated for before. And eventually, of course, as typically happens in these things, he went into the revolving door. He didn't survive a food safety crisis and became a lobbyist for one of the industry groups. And then later on, he started, what was it? The Center, by 1999, he started the Center for Food and Nutrition Policy in Georgetown. And this is a really stunning kind of development in our so-called liberal universities. The existence of these research institutes, so-called, that don't follow academic standards and are actually funded by corporations, and often, as in the case of the Tufts Center for Food Safety, have the name of a great university in their title, so that there will be an article in which someone like Carol Tucker Foreman, the great food safety expert from the Carter administration who's remained an advocate, will be quoted saying, God, this policy is disastrous, we're going to have children dying. And then someone from Tufts saying, oh, well, you know, I think not so fast, you know, we're on the right track here. So basically, Crawford became one of these guys. The Center for Food and Nutrition Policy at Georgetown. It later moved to Virginia Polytechnic. It's quote unquote financially independent. It's one of the right wing's kind of favorite kind of Trojan horse techniques. In fact, at Princeton, they even have a humanities institute that's funded largely by right-wing Catholics run by this guy, Robert George, called the Madison Center. And it's kind of become their way of saying, well, we've made it into Princeton, we've made it into the Ivy League, even though the Ivy League, you know, the Princeton really doesn't have anything to do with the running of the institute. Funded by sugar and soft drink companies, not the Madison Institute, the maybe, I don't know, maybe, who knows. So there's Crawford. Now, why did he take this trajectory? I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that it wasn't really venality, that as he evolved, conservative ideology became more and more hegemonic. And I need to do a lot more research on this. I'll be following it on my blog, but I really feel like he's this character out of a Victorian novel. He's a guy who's really, his soul kind of shifts by increments. I can just imagine, you know, a George Eliot kind of tracing his moral evolution. And the question is, where does this ideology come from? And you know, I really trace it back to Reagan, not only in the sense of, well, government is best where it governs least, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the things we're familiar with. But as many of you know, I'm a historian of the right, and I've been doing a lot of research on Ronald Reagan's 1966 gubernatorial campaign, which I'm convinced is the most fascinating and influential and important political campaign for where we are now anywhere. We call him the great communicator. He came up with this concept of the creative society. very much this kind of counterpoint to Lyndon Johnson's The Great Society. You know, he didn't say, you know, we need less government. He spoke in this kind of very demotic, kind of optimistic argot. What did he call the creative society? Calling on the best in every field and coordinating the creative energies of the people for the good of the whole. Sounds good. And then one of his great quotes was, the best minds are not in government. If any were, business would hire them away. So he wanted the best minds, but he wouldn't actually hire them for the government. He said, for example, since state hospitals and mental institutions were in a sense hotel operations, this is a quote, an expert committee of hotel operators could oversee them instead of government planners. Now, some of you with long memories who are California natives might recall the results. California's mental institutions became wastelands, or, you know, literally, you know, people, you know, like pooping in pails, and it was just really, really, really bad. Well, now Reagan's creative society has become national. Our kitchens have become wastelands. There's many, many examples. By the time of the Vioxx scandal, which some of you remember, Crawford's FDA resembled a mafia. Whistleblower David Graham was said to have voluntarily softened his conclusions that this drug in no way should be on the market. And he said to the media, quote, when you live in a climate of fear, retaliation, and intimidation, no decision that one makes is entirely voluntary. Finally, just to take things full circle, in his brief tenure as FDA chair, Crawford said the FDA was considering borrowing from all animal feed risky materials like cow's blood, thought to cause mad cow disease. Well, it's 8 months later now, and not only have such new rules not been implemented, they haven't even been proposed. Like I said, public relations, not public service. We all know the end of the story. The scary thing is that when Crawford was cashiered for investing in the companies that he was regulating, he might well have believed he'd done nothing wrong. My final word, adulterated food is unadulterated conservatism at work. Thanks.